The elevator stopped so violently that my shoulder slammed into the polished steel wall, and for one terrifying second, the lights flickered hard enough to make me think we were falling. I still remember the sound that escaped from her throat. Not fear exactly. More like disbelief. The kind of sound powerful people make when reality suddenly reminds them they are human too. And standing beside me in that stalled elevator was the most feared woman in the entire building. Everyone in the city knew Evelyn Mercer. She owned half the skyline, according to rumors. Newspapers called her ruthless. Business channels called her brilliant. Employees called her the Ice Queen when she wasn't around. At 26 years old, working as a temporary overnight financial analyst in her company, I had only seen her from a distance before that night. Sharp suits. Perfect posture. Eyes that looked through people instead of at them. But that evening, trapped 30 floors above the ground between cold steel walls and dying fluorescent lights, I saw something nobody else ever did. I saw her break. And before this story begins, if you believe kindness can change lives, if you believe people deserve second chances no matter how powerful or broken they are, take a second to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more emotional stories that stay with you long after they end. The night had already been miserable before the elevator stopped. Rain hammered against the glass windows of Mercer Tower like handfuls of gravel thrown from the sky. Most employees had gone home hours earlier, but quarter-end reports meant the finance department stayed late. I had been surviving on burnt coffee and vending machine crackers while trying not to think about the eviction notice folded inside my backpack. My mother needed surgery. My younger sister's college payments were overdue. And the temporary contract job I depended on was ending in less than 2 weeks. I kept telling myself I just needed one break. One. At nearly midnight, I finally packed my laptop and headed toward the elevators. My body ached from exhaustion, and I barely noticed the second person stepping inside before the doors closed. Then I looked up. Evelyn Mercer stood 3 feet away from me wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her dark hair was pinned elegantly above her shoulders, but a few loose strands framed her face as if the long day had finally managed to touch her perfection. She smelled faintly like expensive perfume and rainwater. I immediately looked down. People like me didn't speak to people like her. The elevator descended quietly for 12 floors before everything went wrong. A violent shudder tore through the cabin. The lights blinked. Then the elevator stopped dead. Silence swallowed us. For a second neither of us moved. Then the emergency lights flickered on, casting the elevator in a dim amber glow that made everything feel strangely unreal. Evelyn pressed the emergency button once. Twice. 3 times. Nothing. Her jaw tightened. I tried to stay calm even though my pulse had started racing. Probably a power issue from the storm, I said carefully. She didn't answer. She hit the intercom again, harder this time, but static crackled back. That was when I noticed her breathing. Fast. Too fast. Her composure remained intact on the surface, but her fingers trembled slightly near the control panel. And suddenly I realized something impossible. Evelyn Mercer was terrified. Minutes passed slowly. The air inside the elevator became warmer, heavier. Rain thundered somewhere beyond the concrete walls of the skyscraper. My phone had no signal. Hers didn't either. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Then came the first crack in the armor. I hate elevators, she whispered. Not arrogantly. Not coldly. Honestly. I didn't know what to say. I had never imagined this woman admitting weakness to anyone. I used to get panic attacks in small spaces when I was younger, she continued quietly, almost as if she regretted speaking the moment the words escaped. I thought I outgrew them. The emergency lights reflected softly in her eyes, and suddenly she didn't look like the terrifying billionaire CEO from magazine covers. She looked exhausted. Human. Broken in ways nobody could see. I sat slowly against the opposite wall to make the space feel less tense. You don't have to pretend you're okay. A bitter smile touched her lips. Pretending is practically my full-time job. That sentence stayed with me. Because powerful people are rarely honest about loneliness. Over the next hour, the storm outside worsened. Building maintenance announced through a weak speaker that flooding in the lower electrical systems had shut down several emergency controls. Rescue teams were coming, but it could take time. Time. Inside that elevator, time changed everything. At first we spoke cautiously, like strangers forced into accidental intimacy. But something about being trapped together stripped away the usual rules of status and power. She asked my name. No executive in that building had ever bothered before. When I told her about my temporary position, she surprised me by already knowing which department I worked in. She even knew my supervisor's name. Then she asked why I stayed so late every night. I should have lied. Instead, maybe because the darkness made honesty easier, I told her the truth. I told her about my mother working herself sick cleaning motel rooms after my father disappeared years ago. About taking extra jobs through college. About debt collectors calling during dinner. About pretending everything was fine because I didn't want my younger sister to lose hope. I expected polite silence. Instead, Evelyn stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. My father used to lock me in closets. The confession hit me so suddenly I almost thought I misheard her. She spoke softly, without emotion at first, like someone reading from a distant memory they hated revisiting. Her father had built the Mercer Empire from nothing, but behind closed doors he ruled his family through fear. Punishment. Isolation. Perfection. Especially for her. When she failed, he locked her in dark spaces for hours because he believed fear created strength. That's why elevators still affect me, she admitted. Every time the doors close, I remember those closets. The woman the city called untouchable suddenly looked unbearably fragile. I realized then that money can hide pain, but it cannot erase it. The hours stretched deeper into the night. At some point she removed her heels because her feet hurt. At another point she laughed quietly at herself for even admitting that. The sound startled me because it was warm and real, nothing like the cold corporate persona everyone feared. Then came the moment I will never forget. The lights failed completely. Darkness swallowed us whole. And Evelyn Mercer panicked. Her breathing became sharp and uneven. I heard her stumble blindly against the wall. The elevator suddenly felt tiny, suffocating. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. "It's okay," I said softly into the darkness. "You're not alone." Her fingers clutched mine instantly. Tightly. Like someone drowning. For nearly 20 minutes we sat there in complete darkness while thunder shook the building around us. I kept talking just to ground her. Stupid stories from childhood. Embarrassing college memories. Anything to keep her mind away from fear. Gradually her breathing slowed. Then, in the dark, she asked me something nobody had ever asked before. "How do you stay kind after everything life has done to you?" I didn't answer immediately because honestly, I didn't know. Finally I said, because bitterness would turn me into the people who hurt us. Silence filled the elevator again. But this time it felt different. Softer. When the emergency lights finally flickered back on, tears glistened in Evelyn's eyes. Not dramatic tears. The quiet kind people tried desperately to hide. She turned away immediately, embarrassed, but I had already seen them. And somehow, after that moment, the walls between us disappeared completely. She told me she hadn't had a real friend in years because everyone around her wanted something. Investors wanted profits. Employees wanted promotions. Men wanted status. Even family members wanted access to her fortune. But nobody actually sees me, she admitted. I understood that feeling more than she realized. Because poor people become invisible in one way. Powerful people become invisible in another. Near 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally settled over both of us. The storm outside weakened slightly. Rescue crews were still working. Evelyn sat beside me now instead of across from me. Not as a CEO beside an employee. Just two tired human beings sharing the strangest night of their lives. Then she asked me the question that changed everything. What would you do if money wasn't a problem anymore? I laughed quietly. Sleep for a week. For the first time all night, she genuinely smiled. Then I told her the truth. I wanted to open a community financial center someday. A place where struggling families could learn budgeting, taxes, debt management, scholarships, basic investing. Free guidance for people who never got taught how money worked because poverty usually leaves people surviving, not learning. I expected her to dismiss it as unrealistic. Instead she looked at me with an expression I still struggle to describe. Almost admiration. That's the first good idea I've heard in years, she said quietly. Hours later, sometime near dawn, metal groaned above us. Voices echoed faintly. The elevator jerked once before slowly descending the final floors manually. After nearly 6 hours trapped together, the doors finally opened. Bright hallway lights flooded inside. Emergency workers stood outside waiting. But what happened next shocked everyone. Evelyn Mercer stepped out of the elevator, then turned back toward me. And hugged me. Not a polite corporate gesture. A real hug. The kind filled with relief, gratitude, and emotion too deep for words. Every employee standing nearby froze in disbelief. The Ice Queen never touched anyone. But before she pulled away, she whispered something in my ear that changed my life forever. Come see me tomorrow morning. Don't disappear. I barely slept that day. Part of me assumed the entire night had been some emotional illusion created by stress and exhaustion. By morning I convinced myself she probably wouldn't even remember half the things we discussed. Still, at 10 sharp, I stood nervously outside the executive office on the top floor. The secretary smiled strangely when she saw me. Almost knowingly. Then the massive office doors opened. Evelyn stood by the windows overlooking the city skyline, sunlight spilling across the room behind her. But she looked different now. Softer somehow. Human in a way nobody else in that building would understand. On her desk sat a folder with my name on it. Inside was a full-time executive analyst contract. Triple my previous salary. Complete medical coverage for my family. And funding approval for a pilot version of the community financial center I had described inside the elevator. I stared at the papers in complete shock. I don't understand, I whispered. Evelyn walked toward the window slowly before answering. Last night, for the first time in years, someone treated me like a person instead of a position. She paused. You reminded me who I used to be before fear turned me into someone cold. Her voice weakened slightly. So this isn't charity. It's gratitude. That moment changed both our lives. Over the next year, the community center opened in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Hundreds of struggling families came for help. Single mothers. Elderly workers. Students drowning in debt. Immigrants trying to build stable futures. And every month, quietly and anonymously, Evelyn funded more programs. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was personal. The woman once feared by everyone in Mercer Tower slowly transformed. Employees noticed she listened more. Smiled occasionally. Started mentorship programs. Reduced impossible workloads. Paid attention when people spoke. Rumors spread that the CEO had changed after the elevator incident. Nobody knew the full truth except us. Sometimes trauma doesn't heal through therapy alone. Sometimes healing begins when another human being simply stays beside you in the dark. And before this story ends, if it touched your heart even a little, please like the video, subscribe to Kindness Corner, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Stories like this remind people that compassion still exists in the world. Also, I want you to comment one thing below before the ending. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your life in a single night? 3 years later, on another stormy evening, I found myself standing beside Evelyn again in the same elevator. Only this time, neither of us was afraid. The elevator descended smoothly while city lights shimmered beyond the glass walls of Mercer Tower. She looked at me and smiled softly. "You know," she said, "getting stuck that night was probably the best thing that ever happened to me." I looked at the reflection of both of us in the steel doors. Two people from completely different worlds. One trapped by poverty. The other trapped by power. Both rescued by kindness. And in that moment I realized something beautiful. Sometimes life closes the doors around you not to punish you, but to force two broken souls into the exact same space long enough for them to save each other.